You work harder than your colleagues, deliver exceptional results, yet somehow remain invisible when promotions and opportunities arise. Every networking event feels like shouting into a void, while others effortlessly command attention and build meaningful connections that advance their careers. I am Dale Carnegie, and I spent decades studying what separates those who are remembered from those who are forgotten in both personal and professional settings. Through my research with thousands of individuals, I discovered the specific principles that make certain people magnetically unforgettable, while others fade into the background despite their talents. What I learned about human psychology and genuine connection will transform how people perceive, remember, and respond to you in 2025. The timeless principles I developed over 80 years ago are more relevant than ever in our digital age, where authentic human connection has become both rare and infinitely valuable. But first, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for transformation. I want to take you back to a farm in Missouri, where a scrawny boy named Dale Carnegie, I changed the spelling, later spent his childhood feeling invisible and insignificant. My father struggled to make ends meet, and I watched him work himself to exhaustion while seemingly getting nowhere in life. The family dinner table was often silent, heavy with worry about money and the future. I felt like just another mouth to feed, another burden on already strained resources. At school, I was the poor farm boy who wore patched clothes and carried lunch in a tin pail while other children had proper lunch boxes. I desperately wanted to be noticed, to matter somehow, but I seemed to fade into the background of every classroom and social gathering. The popular children had an ease about them that I couldn't understand. They spoke with confidence, laughed freely, and somehow commanded attention without seeming to try. My first real awakening came during my college years at Warrensburg State Teachers College. I was painfully shy and struggled with self-doubt, yet something inside me burned with ambition. I joined the debate team, not because I was naturally gifted at public speaking, quite the opposite, but because I knew that if I was ever going to matter in this world, I had to learn how to communicate with people. I'll never forget my first debate. My knees shook so violently I could barely stand, and my voice cracked like a teenager's. I was certain I had made a fool of myself, but afterward, something remarkable happened. Several people approached me, not to mock my nervousness, but to tell me they connected with my passion for the topic. They remembered not my shaking hands or cracking voice, but the genuine conviction behind my words. That night, I lay awake, thinking about what had happened. These people hadn't been impressed by my technical debate skills. I had very few. They had been moved by something deeper, something authentic. They had felt my genuine belief in what I was saying, and that made them want to listen, even through my obvious nervousness. This revelation led me to observe successful people more carefully. I noticed that the most memorable individuals weren't necessarily the most polished or accomplished. They were the ones who made others feel something understood, valued, important. They had mastered the art of genuine human connection. After college, I tried my hand at sales, peddling correspondence courses for the international correspondence schools. I was terrible at it initially because I approached it like a transaction rather than a relationship. I would rattle off features and benefits, trying to impress prospects with my product knowledge. Most people couldn't wait to get rid of me then. I remembered my debate experience. I started approaching potential customers differently. Instead of talking about what I wanted to sell, I began asking about their dreams, their challenges, their goals. I really listened to their answers. Suddenly, I wasn't just a salesman anymore. I was someone who cared about their success. My sales numbers transformed overnight. The breakthrough moment came when I realized that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. This wasn't just a sales technique, it was a fundamental truth about human nature. People are drawn to those who make them feel valued and understood. They remember those who take genuine interest in their lives, their struggles, and their aspirations. When I eventually moved to New York and began teaching public speaking, I carried this understanding with me. I discovered that the students who became most memorable weren't those with the most natural talent, but those who learned to connect authentically with their audience. They understood that being unforgettable isn't about being genuinely interested in others and making them feel that their thoughts and feelings matter. This journey from invisible farm boy to someone who could help others become unforgettable taught me that our greatest weakness can become our greatest strength when we learn to transform it through genuine service to others. Early in my teaching career, I encountered a student who perfectly illustrated the most common mistake people make when trying to become memorable. His name was Robert, and he was a successful engineer who desperately wanted to advance into management. He had enrolled in my public speaking course because he believed that commanding attention was the key to career advancement. Robert would arrive at class 30 minutes early, always sitting in the front row, hand perpetually raised to answer every question. He peppered his conversations with impressive technical jargon and name-dropped famous engineers he claimed to know. During practice sessions, he would interrupt other students to correct their facts or add his own expert commentary. He was trying so hard to be noticed that he had become impossible to ignore, but for all the wrong reasons. What Robert didn't understand was that desperation has an odor that people can detect from across a room. When someone is trying too hard to impress, they emit an energy that actually repels others. It's the energy of need, of insecurity masked as confidence, of someone who cares more about being seen than about seeing others. I watched as Robert's classmates began avoiding him during breaks. They would politely listen when he spoke, but their eyes glazed over. He was getting attention, but it was the kind that makes people uncomfortable rather than drawn to you. The harder he tried to demonstrate his worth, the more he diminished himself in others' eyes. The psychological principle at work here is what I call reciprocal interest. Human beings are naturally drawn to those who show genuine interest in them, and they instinctively withdraw from those who seem only interested in themselves. When you're trying too hard to be impressive, you're essentially broadcasting that your own need for validation is more important than anyone else's feelings or experiences. I remember one particular evening when Robert dominated our class discussion about leadership challenges. He shared story after story about his own accomplishments, each tale designed to showcase his expertise. Meanwhile, sitting quietly in the corner was Margaret, a young secretary who rarely spoke but always listened intently when others shared their struggles. During the break, I observed something fascinating. While Robert stood alone by the coffee table, still talking to anyone who would listen about his latest project, Margaret was surrounded by 3 classmates. They were sharing their real challenges with her, asking for her thoughts, genuinely engaged in conversation. She had become the center of attention without saying a word about herself. The difference was clear. Robert was performing for an audience, while Margaret was connecting with individuals. Robert was trying to prove his value, while Margaret was adding value to others. Live simply by caring about their experiences. This taught me that authenticity creates a magnetic field around a person, while desperation creates a force field that pushes people away. When you stop trying so hard to be noticed and start noticing others, something magical happens. People begin to notice you naturally, not because you're demanding their attention, but because you're giving them something rare and precious, the feeling of being truly seen and valued. The most memorable people I've known understood this paradox. The less you need people's attention, the more attention you naturally receive. They had learned to shift from being attention seekers to attention givers, and that shift transformed them from forgettable to unforgettable. I learned the most important lesson of my career from watching Theodore Roosevelt at a dinner party. In 1902, I was a young man then, invited through a business connection, and I expected to be overwhelmed by the intellectual brilliance of the former president. Instead, I witnessed something that changed my understanding of human magnetism forever. Roosevelt spent the entire evening asking questions, not the polite, surface-level questions most people ask at social gatherings, but deep, genuine inquiries about each person's life and work. I watched him spend 20 minutes with a railroad engineer, asking detailed questions about locomotive maintenance that clearly fascinated him. Later, he engaged a schoolteacher in an animated discussion about innovative teaching methods, taking notes on a napkin as she spoke. What struck me wasn't Roosevelt's knowledge, though he was incredibly well-read, but his authentic curiosity about every person he met. He made each individual feel like the most interesting person at the party, not through flattery or charm, but through genuine fascination with their experiences and expertise. That night, I realized a profound truth. Interested people are infinitely more interesting than people who are trying to be interesting. Roosevelt didn't entertain that gathering with stories of his African safaris or presidential adventures. He entertained them by being genuinely entertained by them. This observation led me to study what I call the neurological basis of feeling valued. When someone shows genuine interest in us, our thoughts, our work, our passions, triggers a positive chemical response in our brain. We literally feel good in their presence. This isn't manipulation or technique. It's tapping into a fundamental human need to feel significant and understood. I began experimenting with this principle in my own interactions. Instead of preparing clever stories or impressive credentials to share at business meetings, I started preparing thoughtful questions. I would research the backgrounds and interests of people I was meeting, not to impress them with my knowledge of their work, but to ask meaningful questions about their experiences. The transformation was immediate and remarkable. People who had previously given me polite but distant attention suddenly became animated and engaged. They would lean forward when talking with me, speak with more passion, and invariably end our conversations by saying how much they had enjoyed our time together. Even though I had done very little talking, one technique I developed was what I call the curiosity cascade. I would ask one genuine question, then build my next question on their answer, creating a natural flow of deeper conversation. For example, instead of asking how's business, I might ask what's the most interesting challenge you're facing in your industry right now. Their answer would spark genuine curiosity in me, leading to follow-up questions that showed I was truly listening and thinking about what they were sharing. The key is that this interest must be authentic. People can sense the difference between genuine curiosity and manufactured interest. When you're truly fascinated by someone's expertise or experience, they feel it. When you're going through the motions of asking questions while thinking about what you want to say next, they feel that too. I discovered that developing genuine interest in others is a skill that can be cultivated. It starts with shifting your mindset from how can I impress this person to what can I learn from this person. Every human being has unique experiences, insights, and knowledge that can enrich your understanding of the world if you're truly interested in discovering it. Nothing I learned in my years of studying human nature proved more immediately powerful than understanding the psychological impact of remembering and using someone's name. I discovered this truth through a painful personal experience that taught me why names are indeed the sweetest sound in any language. I was attending a business conference in Chicago, feeling quite proud of my growing reputation as a speaker and trainer. During a networking reception, I was introduced to a prominent businessman named James Farley. We had a pleasant conversation about public speaking, and I was impressed by his insights and connections. 3 hours later, when our paths crossed again, I confidently approached him and said, "Good evening, Mr. Farrell. How are you enjoying the conference?" The slight pause, the barely perceptible flinch, told me everything. I had gotten his name wrong. "It's Farley," he corrected gently, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. In that moment, I had transformed from someone he remembered positively into someone who clearly hadn't cared enough to remember his name correctly. The conversation that followed was polite but cold, and I never developed the business relationship I had hoped for. That embarrassing mistake led me to develop what became one of my most valuable personal systems. I realized that when someone tells you their name, they're giving you the most personal gift they possess, their identity. How you handle that gift determines whether you become memorable or forgettable in their mind. The psychological impact of hearing your name spoken with respect and recognition is profound. Research has shown that hearing our own name activates the brain differently than hearing other words. It literally lights up regions associated with self-awareness and personal significance. When someone remembers and uses your name correctly, you feel valued and important. When they forget it or mispronounce it, you feel diminished. I developed a 3-step system that never failed me. First, when someone introduces themselves, I repeat their name immediately. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Johnson." This repetition helps cement it in my memory and shows I'm paying attention. Second, I use their name at least twice more during our initial conversation, but naturally, not mechanically. Third, I write their name down within an hour, along with something distinctive about them or our conversation. But the real magic happens in how you use names ongoing. I made it a practice to greet people by name whenever I encountered them, whether it was the next day or the next year. The transformation in their response was remarkable. Eyes would light up, posture would straighten, and suddenly I wasn't just another face in the crowd. I was someone who had made them feel important, enough to remember. I once worked with an executive who complained that he couldn't advance despite his technical competence. I observed him at company meetings and noticed that he referred to everyone as you or generic titles. He never used names, even when addressing people he had worked with for years. I challenged him to learn and use the names of everyone in his department, from senior managers to custodial staff. Within 3 months, his colleagues began describing him as more personable and leadership material. Using names had transformed his professional presence. The multiplication effect of name recognition extends far beyond the individual interaction. When you consistently remember and use people's names, word spreads. You become known as someone who cares about people, who pays attention, who makes others feel valued. This reputation opens doors and creates opportunities that technical skills alone never could. The deepest hunger in human nature is the desire to feel important, to matter, to know that our existence makes a difference in the world. I learned this truth through observing thousands of people over decades, and I discovered that those who master the art of making others feel genuinely important become magnetically unforgettable themselves. I remember receiving a letter from Napoleon Hill, the renowned author of Think and Grow Rich, after he attended one of my seminars. What struck me wasn't just that he wrote to thank me. Successful people receive many thank you notes, but how he wrote it. He didn't just say, "The seminar was good." He told me specifically how one story I shared about overcoming self-doubt had reminded him of his own early struggles and reinforced his commitment to helping others achieve success. He made me feel that my work had touched someone whose opinion I deeply valued. That letter taught me the difference between empty flattery and honest appreciation. Flattery is insincere praise designed to manipulate, while appreciation is sincere recognition of genuine value. People can sense this difference instinctively. Flattery feels hollow because it focuses on superficial qualities or exaggerated praise, Appreciation feels substantial because it recognizes specific actions, qualities, or contributions that are actually praiseworthy. I developed what I call the appreciation archaeology technique. Instead of looking for obvious things to praise, I would dig deeper to find the less visible but more meaningful contributions people make. For instance, rather than telling a colleague, "Great presentation," I might say, "The way you anticipated and addressed the budget concerns in your presentation showed real strategic thinking and saved us from a difficult discussion later." The key is specificity and authenticity. Generic praise, like "You're amazing" or "Great job," has little impact because it could apply to anyone or anything. But when you notice and acknowledge specific behaviors, decisions, or qualities, you demonstrate that you've been paying attention and that you genuinely value their unique contributions. I once worked with a manager who complained that her team seemed unmotivated and disconnected. I observed her interactions and noticed that she rarely acknowledged her team members' efforts beyond perfunctory "good work" comments. I challenged her to find one specific thing to appreciate about each team member's work every week and to express that appreciation personally and specifically. The transformation was remarkable. Within a month, team morale had visibly improved. People were staying late to help each other, volunteering for additional projects, and bringing more creative energy to their work. When I asked what had changed, one team member said, "She finally sees us. She notices what we're actually doing and why it matters." This experience taught me that making people feel important isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about the consistent practice of noticing and acknowledging the value that people bring to your life and work. When you help someone feel genuinely important, you don't just make their day better, you associate yourself with one of their most fundamental psychological needs. The multiplication effect is profound. People remember those who make them feel valued, and they seek opportunities to interact with them again. They speak positively about them to others, creating a reputation for being someone who elevates and inspires. Most importantly, they reciprocate by making you feel important in return, creating a positive cycle that strengthens relationships and opens unexpected opportunities. But this practice must come from a genuine place of recognizing human worth and contribution. When you help others feel important because you truly believe they are important, you tap into one of the most powerful forces in human relationships. During my years of teaching public speaking, I made a counterintuitive discovery. The most powerful speakers weren't necessarily the most eloquent talkers, they were the most skilled listeners. I learned this through observing one of my most remarkable students, a quiet executive named William, who transformed his entire career by mastering what I came to call magnetic listening. William came to my class because he had been passed over for promotion 3 times. He was technically competent, well-educated, and hard-working, but his colleagues and superiors consistently described him as unremarkable and forgettable. He believed the solution was to become a more dynamic speaker, to command attention through better presentation skills. During our first session, I asked William to tell me about his last significant conversation with his supervisor. As he recounted the meeting, I noticed something telling. He could give me a detailed summary of every point he had made, every argument he had presented, and every solution he had proposed. But when I asked him what his supervisor had said, what concerns had been expressed, or what questions had been asked, William struggled to remember specifics. This pattern revealed the fundamental problem. William was so focused on being heard that he had never learned to truly hear others. He was present in conversations physically, but mentally he was rehearsing his next point or formulating his rebuttal. People felt unheard in his presence, which made him forgettable despite his good intentions and solid ideas. I introduced William to what I call the 3-level listening system. Level 1 is waiting for your turn to talk. You hear words, but You're primarily focused on your own response. Level 2 is hearing for information. You understand what's being said but miss the emotions and deeper meanings. Level 3 is listening for understanding. You hear not just the words but the feelings, concerns, hopes, and fears behind those words. Most people operate at level 1 or 2, but those who become truly unforgettable master level 3. They listen not just to respond but to understand. They hear not just what people say but what people mean. They pick up on the emotions and underlying needs that the speaker might not even be fully aware of themselves. I taught William to practice what I called reflective listening. Instead of immediately responding with his own thoughts, he would first reflect back what he had heard. It sounds like you're concerned about the timeline because quality is crucial for this client relationship. This simple technique forced him to truly process what others were saying and demonstrated that he valued their perspective enough to understand it fully. The transformation was remarkable. Within 3 months, William's colleagues began describing him as thoughtful and insightful. His supervisor started seeking his input on important decisions. He wasn't saying anything particularly different, but people felt heard and understood in his presence, which made every conversation more meaningful and memorable. I realized that in our age of constant communication, the ability to make someone feel truly heard has become incredibly rare and therefore incredibly powerful. When you listen to someone with complete attention and genuine interest, you give them a gift that few people receive regularly: the experience of being fully present with another human being. True listening requires setting aside your own agenda, your desire to impress, and your need to be right. It requires what I call generous attention, giving someone the full gift of your mental and emotional presence. When you master this skill, people don't just remember what you said in conversations. They remember how you made them feel, and that feeling becomes associated with you permanently. I discovered the transformative power of a genuine smile through one of the most difficult periods of my life. It was 1932, during the height of the Great Depression, and I was facing financial difficulties that threatened to end my speaking career. I was discouraged, worried, and frankly, had little reason to smile. Yet it was during this dark time that I learned how a sincere smile could literally change the course of a conversation, a relationship, and ultimately, a life. I was scheduled to speak at a small church in Pittsburgh to a group of unemployed men. I arrived feeling defeated, wondering how I could possibly inspire others when I was struggling myself. As I walked into the basement meeting room, I saw 30 faces etched with worry, frustration, and hopelessness. My first instinct was to match their somber mood, to acknowledge the gravity of their situation with appropriate seriousness. But something inside me rebelled against this impulse. I realized that these men didn't need another person to confirm their troubles. They needed someone to remind them that hope and joy was still possible. So I made a conscious decision to smile, not a false, plastered-on grin, but a warm expression of genuine care and optimism for their futures. The effect was immediate and remarkable. Faces began to soften, postures straightened slightly, and I could feel the energy in the room shift. By the end of my talk, these same men were laughing, sharing ideas, and making plans to support each other through their job searches. One man told me afterward, "When you walked in here smiling, like you actually believed things could get better, I started to believe it too." That experience taught me that a genuine smile is not just a facial expression, it's an emotional transmission. When you smile authentically, you're communicating hope, warmth, acceptance, and positive expectation. You're telling the other person that you're glad to see them, that their presence brings you joy, and that you expect good things from your interaction together. But here's the crucial distinction I learned. There's a world of difference between a genuine smile and a forced one. A forced smile engages only the mouth muscles. While a genuine smile, what researchers now call a Duchenne smile, involves the entire face, especially the muscles around the eyes. People can instinctively detect this difference, and a fake smile can actually work against you, making you appear insincere or manipulative. I developed what I call the inner smile technique. Before any important interaction, I would take a moment to think about something that genuinely made me happy or grateful. This could be as simple as appreciating the opportunity to meet someone new, or feeling thankful for my health and abilities. By generating authentic positive emotion internally, the smile that appeared on my face was naturally genuine and warm. The neurological impact of smiling extends beyond social interaction. When you smile genuinely, your brain releases endorphins and serotonin, actually improving your own mood and energy level. This creates a positive feedback loop. You smile because you feel good, which makes you feel better, which makes your smile more authentic, which makes others respond more positively to you. I observed that people who became truly unforgettable had mastered the art of smiling with their entire being, not just their face. Their eyes sparkled with genuine warmth. Their voice carried the lightness of someone who was genuinely pleased to be present, and their whole body language conveyed openness and positive energy. They had learned that a smile is not something you put in, it's something you genuinely feel and naturally express. One of the most valuable skills I developed was learning how to build bridges between people through conversation, connecting strangers, finding common ground, and creating the kind of meaningful dialogue that people remember long after the words fade. I discovered this ability almost by accident at a business dinner, where I was seated between two men who had never met and seemed to have nothing in common. To my left sat Harold, a gruff construction foreman who spoke in short, direct sentences and seemed uncomfortable in the formal dinner setting. To my right was Professor Mitchell, a soft-spoken literature professor who appeared equally out of place among the business crowd. The conversation at our table was stilted, with each man politely answering direct questions, but showing no inclination to engage further. Rather than resign myself to an awkward evening, I decided to experiment with what I later called conversational archaeology, digging beneath surface differences to find shared human experiences. I began by asking Harold about the most challenging project he had ever managed. As he described rebuilding a bridge after a flood, his passion for problem-solving and craftsmanship became evident. Then I turned to Professor Mitchell and asked about the most difficult concept he had ever had to teach his students. As Mitchell described breaking down complex literary themes for reluctant learners, I noticed something remarkable. Both men were talking about the same fundamental challenge: how to build something meaningful and lasting, whether it was a physical structure or an intellectual understanding. I gently pointed out this parallel, and suddenly two strangers discovered they shared a deep appreciation for the art of careful, patient construction. That conversation taught me that meaningful connections aren't found in obvious similarities, like shared hobbies or backgrounds, but in universal human experiences, challenges overcome, lessons learned, values held dear. Everyone has stories of struggle and triumph, moments of doubt and discovery, experiences of loss and growth. When you learn to identify and explore these deeper commonalities, you can create instant rapport between people who might otherwise remain strangers. I developed what I call the bridge-building question system. Instead of asking, "What do you do?" which often leads to superficial professional descriptions, I learned to ask questions that revealed character and values. What's the most important lesson your work has taught you? Or what project are you most proud of, and why? These questions invite people to share not just facts about their lives, but insights into who they are as human beings. The key to becoming a master conversation facilitator is developing genuine curiosity. about human nature and learning to ask questions that help people reveal their best selves. When you become known as someone who can draw out interesting stories and create meaningful connections, people actively seek you out at social and professional gatherings. I also learned the art of the graceful transition, how to move conversations from small talk to substance without making people feel interrogated. This requires sensitivity to social cues and the ability to share appropriately personal stories that encourage others to open up in return. When you master this skill, you become the person who transforms ordinary encounters into memorable experiences. The most unforgettable people I've known were those who could take a room full of strangers and, through skillful conversation, facilitation, create a sense of community and connection. They understood that people don't remember facts as much as they remember feelings, and they had learned to consistently create the feeling that every conversation with them was meaningful and worthwhile. The most profound lesson I learned about becoming unforgettable came from understanding that people remember how you made them feel far longer than they remember what you said or did. This realization led me to study what I now recognize as emotional intelligence, the ability to understand, manage, and skillfully navigate the emotional currents that flow through every human interaction. I learned this through working with a brilliant executive named Charles, who had been demoted despite exceptional technical skills and strategic thinking. When his company's board asked me to coach him, I quickly discovered the problem. Charles was emotionally tone deaf. He would propose cost-cutting measures during company celebrations, deliver criticism immediately after people shared personal achievements, and respond to emotional concerns with purely logical arguments. Charles wasn't malicious or uncaring. He simply had never learned to read the emotional climate of a room or to regulate his own emotional impact on others. He delivered every message with the same intensity, whether he was discussing quarterly budgets or announcing layoffs. People found interactions with him exhausting and unpredictable, never knowing if they would encounter warmth or coldness, enthusiasm or criticism. I taught Charles what I call emotional calibration, the skill of reading the emotional state of individuals and groups before deciding how to communicate. Just as a skilled musician tunes their instrument to the acoustic properties of a room, emotionally intelligent people tune their communication style to the emotional environment they encounter. This begins with developing awareness of your own emotional state and how it affects others. When you're anxious, frustrated, or excited, you emit emotional energy that others unconsciously absorb and respond to. If you're unaware of this dynamic, you can inadvertently create tension, resistance, or discomfort without understanding why people seem to withdraw from you. I introduced Charles to the practice of emotional pre-flight checks, taking a moment before important interactions to assess his own emotional state and adjust accordingly. If he was feeling stressed about deadlines, he would take time to calm himself before meeting with his team, ensuring that his urgency didn't translate into pressure that would make others defensive or anxious. Equally important was learning to read the emotional states of others and respond appropriately. When someone shares exciting news, they need enthusiasm and celebration, not immediate analysis of potential challenges. When someone expresses concern or frustration, they need empathy and understanding before they can hear solutions or suggestions. The transformation in Charles was remarkable. Within 6 months, his colleagues began describing him as approachable and considerate. His team's productivity increased as people felt more comfortable bringing him both good news and problems. He was promoted back to his original position because people now trusted him not just with data and strategy, but with their feelings and concerns. This experience taught me that emotional intelligence is not about manipulating emotions or being artificially sweet. It's about recognizing that every human interaction has an emotional dimension that affects the outcome. When you learn to navigate this dimension, skillfully reading emotional cues, managing your own emotional impact, and responding to others, emotional needs to become someone people want to work with, confide in, and remember positively. The most unforgettable people understand that logic may convince minds, but emotions move hearts. They've learned to combine rational communication with emotional wisdom, creating interactions that are both effective and meaningful. They know that in a world where technical skills are increasingly common, the ability to connect with others emotionally becomes the rarest and most valuable talent of all. I discovered the unforgettable power of storytelling during a speaking engagement where I faced the most challenging audience of my career, a room full of skeptical engineers who had been forced to attend a seminar on human relations. They sat with arms crossed, checking their watches, clearly believing that soft skills were a waste of time for technical professionals. I had planned to begin with statistics about workplace productivity and collaboration, but reading the room, I realized that data wouldn't penetrate their resistance. Instead, I told them about Tom, a brilliant engineer I had known who could design complex systems that others couldn't understand, but who died alone and largely forgotten because he had never learned to connect with the people around him. I described how Tom's innovative designs were often overlooked because he couldn't communicate their value effectively, how his insights were dismissed because he made colleagues feel stupid, and how his career stagnated despite his exceptional technical abilities. By the time I finished Tom's story, the room had transformed. Arms uncrossed, eyes focused, and several engineers nodded in recognition they had known people like Tom, or perhaps feared becoming him themselves. That experience taught me that while facts inform, stories transform. When you share a statistic, people may remember the number temporarily. When you tell a compelling story, people remember the lesson permanently because stories engage multiple parts of the brain simultaneously. The logical centers that process information, the emotional centers that create feeling, and the memory centers that store experiences. I began collecting stories systematically, not just dramatic tales of triumph and tragedy, but everyday moments that illustrated timeless principles. I told stories about the shy secretary who became a department head by learning to speak up in meetings, the gruff supervisor who transformed his team's morale with a simple change in how he gave feedback, and the young salesman who built a loyal customer base by remembering details about his clients' families. The key to powerful storytelling, I learned, is specificity and authenticity. Generic stories about unnamed people making vague improvements feel fabricated and forgettable. But when you tell detailed stories about real people facing specific challenges and achieving concrete results, listeners can see themselves in similar situations and imagine applying the same principles. I developed what I call the story formula for impact: context, setting up the situation; conflict, the challenge or problem faced; choice, the decision made or principle applied; and consequence, the specific result achieved. This structure helps listeners follow the logic of cause and effect while remaining emotionally engaged with the human drama. But the most unforgettable storytellers don't just collect other people's stories, they master the art of sharing their own experiences in ways that illustrate universal truths. When you can take a personal moment of failure, learning, or triumph and craft it into a story that helps others understand an important principle, you create a powerful connection between your experience and their potential. I learned to be vulnerable in my storytelling, sharing not just my successes but my failures and embarrassments. When I told audiences about forgetting Mr. Farley's name or struggling with stage fright, they didn't think less of me, they related to me. They saw that someone they respected had faced similar challenges and overcome them, which made my advice more credible and inspiring. The multiplication effect of masterful storytelling extends far beyond the immediate audience. good stories get retold, carrying your message and your name to people you may never meet. When someone shares one of your stories to illustrate a point, they're essentially becoming an ambassador for your ideas and your reputation. This is how certain people become unforgettable, even to those who have never met them personally. One of the most challenging tests of becoming unforgettable comes when you must disagree with someone while maintaining their respect and goodwill. I learned this crucial skill through a heated debate with a prominent businessman who had publicly criticized my methods as too soft for the competitive business world. My first instinct was to defend my approach vigorously, to prove him wrong with examples and evidence. But I caught myself and remembered a principle I had been teaching others. You can disagree with someone's ideas while still respecting their right to hold those ideas. I took a different approach that not only preserved our relationship but strengthened it. Instead of attacking his position, I began by finding elements of truth in his perspective. You raise an important point about the competitive nature of business, I said. Strength and decisiveness are absolutely crucial for leadership success. This acknowledgement didn't require me to abandon my own beliefs, but it showed that I had listened to and understood his concerns. I then shared my perspective as an addition to, rather than a contradiction of, his viewpoint. My experience has shown me that the strongest leaders are those who can be both decisive and empathetic, both competitive and collaborative. The soft skills I teach actually make the hard business decisions more effective, because they're based on better information and stronger relationships. The conversation that followed was one of the most productive discussions either of us had experienced. Instead of becoming adversaries, defending fixed positions, we became collaborators, exploring a complex topic. By the end, he had gained new insights into the business value of human relations skills, and I had deepened my understanding of the pressures facing executives in highly competitive industries. This experience taught me what I call the both and principle of graceful disagreement. Instead of approaching differences as either or conflicts, where one person must be right and the other wrong, I learned to look for both and solutions, where multiple perspectives could coexist and complement each other. The technique requires genuine intellectual humility, the recognition that your perspective, however well informed, is still limited by your own experience and biases. When you approach disagreements with curiosity rather than certainty, seeking to understand rather than to win, you transform potential conflicts into opportunities for mutual learning. I developed a practice of asking myself before any disagreement, what if this person is partially right? What can I learn from their perspective? How might my own viewpoint be incomplete? This mental preparation helped me listen more openly and respond more thoughtfully. Even when the other person's position initially seemed completely wrong to me, the most unforgettable people I've known were those who could disagree without being disagreeable, who could challenge ideas without attacking the people who held them. They understood that in most cases, maintaining the relationship was more important than winning the argument, and that the best way to influence someone's thinking was to first demonstrate that you valued their perspective enough to understand it fully. When you master the art of graceful disagreement, you become someone people trust with their controversial ideas and difficult decisions. They know you won't attack them personally for holding different views, which makes them more willing to share their honest thoughts and consider alternative perspectives. This trust becomes the foundation for deeper relationships and greater influence than any debate victory could provide. The most powerful way to become unforgettable is to help others see and believe in possibilities they never imagined for themselves. I learned this through my relationship with a young woman named Eleanor, who attended my classes in the early 1920s, a shy, stammering secretary who believed she was destined to remain invisible and insignificant for her entire career. Eleanor came to my public speaking course because her supervisor had suggested it might help her confidence, but she sat in the back row, rarely spoke, and seemed to shrink whenever attention turned her way. During practice sessions, her voice would shake so violently that her words were barely comprehensible. Other students would look away in embarrassment, clearly doubting that the class could help someone with such severe speaking anxiety. But I saw something in Eleanor that she couldn't see in herself. When she did speak, her ideas were thoughtful and well-reasoned. Her written exercises demonstrated keen insight and genuine wisdom. She had the intellectual capacity for leadership. She simply lacked the confidence to express it. I made a decision that changed both of our lives. I would become Eleanor's champion, helping her discover her own potential through consistent, specific encouragement. After each of her speaking attempts, however faltering, I would find something genuinely praiseworthy to highlight. Not empty flattery about her effort or courage, but specific recognition of her actual strengths. Eleanor, your point about employee motivation was exactly what this audience needed to hear, I would say. The way you connected those two concepts showed real analytical thinking. I began asking Eleanor to share her insights during class discussions, not to put her on the spot, but to demonstrate that I valued her contributions. When she would apologize for her nervousness, I would redirect her attention to the substance of what she had shared. Don't apologize for being nervous, I would tell her. Focus on the fact that you just gave this class a valuable new perspective on leadership. Over the course of 6 months, I watched Eleanor transform, not overnight, and not without setbacks, but gradually and steadily. Her voice grew stronger, her posture straightened, and most importantly, she began to see herself differently. She started volunteering for speaking opportunities rather than avoiding them. She offered ideas in business meetings instead of remaining silent. 5 years later, Eleanor was promoted to department head at her company. 10 years after that, she started her own successful consulting firm. She would often tell people that her career began the day someone believed in her potential, before she believed in it herself. She credited me with changing her life, but the truth was more complex. I had simply helped her discover what was already there. This experience taught me that effective encouragement is not about empty praise or false reassurance. It's about helping people recognize their authentic strengths and potential, especially when they can't see these qualities themselves. When you become known as someone who helps others discover their best selves, you create a loyalty and appreciation that transcends ordinary professional relationships. I learned to look for what I call hidden gold in every person I encountered, insights or qualities that were real but underdeveloped or unrecognized. By consistently pointing out these strengths and encouraging their development, I helped countless individuals exceed their own expectations and achieve success they had never imagined possible. The multiplication effect is profound. When you help someone believe in themselves, they don't just remember your encouragement, they become living proof of your positive impact, often spending years telling others about the person who saw their potential when no one else did. While I lived in an era of face-to-face conversation and handwritten letters, the principles I discovered about human nature remain constant, even as technology transforms how we communicate. If I were teaching in today's digital world, I would emphasize that the fundamental human needs for connection, recognition, and significance haven't changed, but the channels through which we meet these needs have evolved dramatically. The challenge of becoming unforgettable in 2025 is both easier and harder than it was in my time. Easier because technology allows you to maintain relationships across vast distances and time zones, to remember details about hundreds of people through digital tools, and to share encouragement and appreciation instantly. Harder because the sheer volume of digital communication makes it difficult to stand out, and the impersonal nature of screens can strip away the emotional nuance that makes interactions memorable. I observe that many people today mistake digital connection for genuine relationship building. They collect contacts like my generation collected business cards, focusing on quantity rather than quality of connection. They send generic messages to large groups rather than personal communications to individuals. They share information rather than sharing themselves. If I were coaching someone today, I would teach them to use technology as a tool for deepening human connection, not replacing it. When you receive a digital message from someone, respond in a way that shows you've truly heard them, not just processed their information. When you see someone's social media post about an achievement or challenge, reach out with a personal message that acknowledges their specific situation rather than just clicking a generic like button. The art of remembering names becomes even more powerful in the digital age because it's so rarely practiced well. While technology can help you store and recall information about people, the emotional impact of someone taking the time to remember and use your name correctly in a personal message is perhaps more meaningful now than ever before. Precisely because it's become less common, I would adapt my listening principles to include what I call digital listening, paying attention not just to what people say directly, but to what they reveal through their online choices, interests, and concerns. When you notice that someone has been posting about a particular challenge or interest, and you reach out with genuine curiosity and support, you demonstrate the same quality of attention that made face-to-face listening so powerful. The principle of making others feel important translates beautifully to digital communication. In a world where people are constantly competing for attention online, the person who consistently makes others feel seen, heard, and valued stands out dramatically. This might mean taking time to write thoughtful comments on others' posts, sharing their achievements with your network, or simply sending a private message to acknowledge something meaningful they've shared. Even the power of a genuine smile can be conveyed through digital channels, through the warmth of your written voice, the enthusiasm in your video messages, and the positive energy you bring to virtual meetings. People can feel your authentic interest and care even through a screen when it's genuinely present. The timeless truth remains. People don't remember what you post or send as much as they remember how your communications make them feel. In an age of information overload, the rarest and most valuable gift you can give someone is the feeling that they matter to you as an individual human being, not just as another contact in your digital network. The culmination of everything I learned about becoming unforgettable revealed itself in what I call professional magnetism, the ability to become the person everyone wants on their team, the colleague people seek out for advice, and the individual whose presence elevates every meeting and project. This magnetism isn't built on self-promotion or political maneuvering, but on a systematic approach to adding genuine value to others' professional lives. I discovered this formula through observing Sarah, a mid-level manager who seemed to effortlessly attract opportunities, collaborations, and advancement despite working in a highly competitive corporate environment. While others focused on highlighting their own achievements, Sarah had mastered the art of making others successful and, in doing so, had made herself indispensable. Sarah's approach was deceptively simple but profoundly effective. In every meeting, she asked herself not how can I look good, but how can I help others succeed. When a colleague presented an idea, she would ask thoughtful questions that helped them refine their thinking. When someone faced a challenge, she would offer resources, connections, or insights that might help. When projects succeeded, she ensured that credit went to the appropriate team members, while when projects struggled, she quietly contributed solutions without seeking recognition. The result was remarkable. People began seeking Sarah's input on important decisions because they knew she would help them think through problems thoroughly rather than push her own agenda. Senior executives included her in strategic meetings because she had a reputation for asking the questions that led to better outcomes. Colleagues volunteered to work on her projects because they knew the experience would be professionally enriching. and personally satisfying. I realized that Sarah had intuitively understood a crucial principle in professional environments. The most unforgettable people are those who make others look good. When you consistently help colleagues succeed, present their best ideas, solve their problems, and achieve their goals, you become associated with their positive experiences and achievements. They don't just remember you fondly, they become invested in your success because your success has been connected to theirs. This approach requires what I call strategic selflessness, being genuinely committed to others' success while understanding that this commitment ultimately serves your own professional interests. It's not manipulation because the help you provide is real and valuable. It's not self-sacrifice because helping others succeed creates a network of relationships that opens unexpected opportunities for your own advancement. I've taught this principle to countless professionals who felt stuck in their careers despite strong technical skills. The transformation was consistently dramatic. Within months of adopting the help others succeed mindset, they would find themselves included in important projects, consulted on significant decisions, and recommended for advancement opportunities. Their reputation shifted from competent individual contributor to valuable team player and leader. The key is authenticity and consistency. People can sense the difference between someone who helps others as a calculated strategy and someone who genuinely cares about their colleagues. Success. The magnetic effect only works when your desire to help is real and when your assistance is reliable over time. When you become known as the person who makes others successful, you create what I call multiplicative value. Your worth to the organization extends far beyond your individual contributions to include your positive impact on everyone around you. This makes you not just valuable, but irreplaceable, because replacing you would mean losing not just one productive employee, but the positive influence you have on the entire team's performance and morale. The most unforgettable leaders I've encountered throughout my career possessed a quality that transcended their formal authority or job title. They had what I call leadership presence, an invisible but unmistakable magnetism that made people want to follow them even when they had no obligation to do so. This presence isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop through the conscious cultivation of certain principles and practices. I learned this through studying Franklin D. Roosevelt during the early days of the New Deal. Despite facing unprecedented national challenges and criticism from many quarters, Roosevelt possessed an unshakable confidence that seemed to emanate from within. When he entered a room, people felt that problems could be solved, that challenges could be overcome, and that the future held promise rather than only difficulties. What struck me most about Roosevelt wasn't his eloquence or political skill, though both were considerable. It was his ability to make everyone around him feel that they were part of something significant and meaningful. He had mastered the art of inspiring confidence without arrogance, of projecting strength without rigidity, and of maintaining optimism without ignoring reality. I began to analyze what created this magnetic leadership presence and discovered that it rested on four foundational elements. First, authentic confidence, not the bravado of someone trying to convince themselves and others of their capabilities, but the quiet assurance of someone who had faced challenges, learned from failures, and developed genuine competence through experience. Second, genuine care for others' success and well-being. The most memorable leaders I've known were those who clearly cared more about their team's growth and achievement than about their own recognition. This care wasn't sentimental or weak. It was practical and strong, driving them to make decisions that served the long-term interests of their people, even when those decisions were difficult or unpopular. Third, the ability to communicate a compelling vision of the future. Unforgettable leaders help people see possibilities they couldn't see on their own, and they make those possibilities feel both inspiring and achievable. They understand that people follow leaders who can help them become better versions of themselves and accomplish things they couldn't accomplish alone. Fourth, emotional steadiness under pressure. When crises arise, they always do people look to leaders for cues about how to respond. Leaders with magnetic presence maintain their composure and clarity even in difficult situations, not because they don't feel stress or uncertainty, but because they've learned to manage their emotions in service of their responsibilities. I worked with many executives who possessed impressive technical knowledge and strategic thinking ability, but lacked leadership presence. They would make sound decisions, but fail to inspire commitment. They would communicate effectively, but fail to create enthusiasm. They would manage competently, but fail to develop loyalty. The transformation came when they learned to shift their focus from managing tasks to inspiring people, from solving problems to developing others' problem-solving capabilities, from achieving their own goals to helping their team achieve collective goals. This shift required them to develop what I call servant leadership, using their position and influence primarily to serve others' growth and success rather than their own advancement. When you develop true leadership presence, people remember not just what you accomplished, but how you made them feel about themselves and their potential. They remember that working with you made them better, stronger, and more capable. This kind of impact creates a loyalty and respect that extends far beyond formal reporting relationships and lasts long after professional paths diverged us. As I reflect on my decades of studying human nature and helping people develop unforgettable presence, I've come to understand that the most meaningful form of being remembered isn't about personal fame or recognition. It's about the positive impact you have on others' lives that continues long after you're gone. This is what I call the legacy builder's mindset, and it represents the highest form of becoming truly unforgettable. I learned this lesson through a letter I received from a former student 20 years after he had attended my course. John wrote to tell me the principles he had learned in my class had not only transformed his own career, but had become the foundation for how he raised his children and managed his team. He was now teaching these same principles to his own employees, who were applying them in their relationships with customers and colleagues. The impact of our brief time together had multiplied across decades and generations. That letter forced me to examine what it really means to leave a lasting impression on the world. I realized that while being remembered for your achievements brings a certain satisfaction, being remembered for the positive changes you helped create in others' lives brings a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment. When you focus on building a legacy rather than just building a reputation, your entire approach to relationships and influence changes. Legacy builders think in longer time horizons than most people. Instead of asking, "How can I succeed today?" they ask, "How can I help others succeed in ways that will create positive ripple effects for years to come?" Instead of focusing on immediate recognition, they focus on developing others' capabilities and character. Instead of accumulating power for themselves, they multiply power in others. I began to shift my own teaching approach based on this understanding. Rather than just helping people become more successful speakers or more influential professionals, I started focusing on helping them become better human beings who would use their enhanced capabilities to serve others. I realized that my true legacy wouldn't be the number of people who attended my courses, but the number of lives that were improved by the people I had taught. This legacy mindset requires what I call multiplicative thinking, understanding that your greatest impact comes not from what you accomplish directly, but from what you enable others to accomplish. When you teach someone a principle that helps them succeed, and they teach that principle to others, your influence expands exponentially. When you help someone develop confidence and capability, and they use those qualities to help others, your positive impact ripples outward in ways you may never fully know. The most unforgettable people in history are those who understood this principle intuitively. They invested their time, energy, and wisdom in developing others rather than just promoting themselves. They measured their success not by what they accumulated, but by what they contributed. They understood that true immortality comes not from being remembered for what you achieved, but from living on through the positive changes you helped create in others. When you adopt the legacy builder's mindset, people remember you not just as someone who was successful, but as someone who helped them become successful. They remember you not just as someone who was impressive, but as someone who helped them discover their own potential to make an impressive contribution to the world. This shift in perspective transforms every interaction into an opportunity to plant seeds of positive change that may bloom long after you're gone. It makes every relationship a chance to invest in someone's growth and development. It makes every conversation an opportunity to share wisdom, encouragement, or insight that could change the trajectory of someone's life. As we reach the end of our journey together, I want to leave you with the most important truth I've discovered. In my lifetime of studying human relationships, becoming unforgettable is not about perfecting techniques or mastering strategies. It's about making a fundamental decision to live your life in service of others' growth, happiness, and success. When you make this decision and commit to it daily, everything else we've discussed becomes a natural expression of who you are, rather than artificial behaviors you perform. The transformation begins the moment you wake up each morning and ask yourself not, "How can I have a good day?" but "How can I help someone else have a better day?" This simple shift in daily intention will change every interaction you have, every conversation you engage in, and every relationship you build. You'll find yourself naturally remembering people's names because you genuinely care about them as individuals. You'll discover yourself listening more intently because you're truly interested in understanding others' experiences and perspectives. I challenge you to begin this transformation immediately with what I call the daily practice of becoming unforgettable. Each morning, identify one person you will focus on serving that day, not serving in a subservient way, but serving in the sense of adding genuine value to their life. This might mean offering encouragement to a colleague who's facing a challenge, asking thoughtful questions that help someone clarify their thinking, or simply giving someone your complete attention when they need to be heard. Keep a small notebook or digital record of positive interactions you have each day, not to analyze or judge your performance, but to reinforce the habit of noticing when you've made a genuine connection with another human being. Over time, you'll discover that these moments of authentic connection become more frequent and natural as you develop what I call other-focused awareness. The world desperately needs more people who understand these principles. In our increasingly connected yet impersonal age, the individual who can create genuine human connection stands out like a lighthouse in the darkness. You have the opportunity to become that lighthouse for the people in your life, your family, your colleagues, your community, and even strangers you encounter briefly. But remember that authenticity is the foundation of everything. If you try to apply these principles as mere techniques to get what you want from others, people will sense the manipulation and you'll become forgettable for all the wrong reasons. These principles only work when they flow from a genuine desire to contribute positively to others' lives. Start where you are, with the people around you right now. You don't need to wait for a better job, a bigger platform, or more influence to begin making others feel valued and important. The cashier at your local store, the colleague in the next cubicle, the neighbor you rarely speak to, each of these people presents an opportunity to practice becoming someone who adds light and value to others' lives. My final words to you are these: the principles I've shared are not just about becoming unforgettable. They're about becoming the kind of person who makes the world a little better, one relationship at a time. When you commit to this path, You don't just change how others remember you, you change who you become. And that transformation, more than any external success or recognition, will be the source of your deepest satisfaction and most lasting fulfillment. The future belongs to those who understand that true success is measured not by what you achieve for yourself, but by what you help others achieve for themselves. Make the choice to become unforgettable by making others feel unforgettable, and watch as your life transforms in ways you never imagined possible.